everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I'm Nicole Forbes with Dennis's 7Ds, and today we're talking about ground covers, creeping and cascading perennials. It's a big topic, and I really want to focus more on cascading and creeping perennials than true kind of average ground covers, but we'll cover those, just not in quite as much detail. The kind of the addition of or planting of ground cover in most gardens and landscapes is one of those like finishing touch steps. So your shrubs go in first, of course, and trees and shrubs, the bigger material. Of course, then your underlayer plantings of perennials, grasses perhaps, and the final planting would be your ground cover layer. And ground cover is used for several different purposes. Primarily, it's there to compete with weeds because having empty ground, having bare ground is usually kind of counterproductive in nature. So nature wants to fill that ground with something, whether it's, in our opinion, a weed plant or with, a plant of our choosing. Putting in a ground cover is essentially you deciding what plant goes in that space as opposed to nature making the choice herself. As with all of our classes, there is a handout that accompanies this talk. I have to give mad props to camera woman Becky for kind of pulling this off today. I finished the handout at like 7 o'clock this morning. This is a new class this year, and we've been kind of busy this week. So Becky was able to, it's not pretty yet, but she's going to add pictures later. Becky was able to get it posted, and I didn't even think that was going to happen. So yay, Becky. A lot of information on the plant material that I'm going to show and kind of talk about is really detailed on the handout. So that'll be attached to the top of this video screen right up underneath the title of the video. Right now, as you're driving around, especially around Portland, it's hard not to notice the well done and well planted retaining walls. They are exploding with spring color. And what you see most often this time of year are some of kind of the best known cascading perennials for walls. One which you may see in, its brilliant gold when it's in bloom is this Aurelia. This is Summit, but it's usually called Basket of Gold. Aurelia is usually paired with Aurelia, which is this little plant here. And Aurelia comes in a couple of different colors. So we have this already, like my eyes almost hurt with the vibrancy of the colors here. But this is what you careen your neck around as you're going through an intersection in spring and see that just blast of color. Typically is these three plants spilling over on someone's retaining wall or rock wall. And to kind of soften those bright colors, often the white flower that we see this spring that is coordinating with these other bright colors is candy tuft. So candy tuft is another real common one that we see spilling over walls this time of year. Now, a lot of properties in the Portland metro area have either like raised sections along your driveway, either the front of your property sits higher than the sidewalk, so you end up with a retaining wall in that area, or maybe in a sloped backyard where you've either got rocks to stabilize the bank, or a retaining wall of some sort to help level the space to make it more usable. And those retaining walls might be possibly they're beautiful, artisan cut, hand stacked stone walls, but more often than not, they're either, made of wood or they may be like cottage stones or landscape building stones, which are, you know, kind of bricks or larger bricks that fit together. So we may want to soften the look of some of that hardscape in our yards by adding that planting layer to spill over the wall. Now, you know, you can't, in many cases, unless you've got pockets of rocks, you can't plant into the wall. But many of these will go into pockets if you have that kind of loose stacked arrangement. But most of these, as I mentioned, cascading or mounding, will spill over the edge of the wall if they're planted at the top. So they're not climbing, they're not going to go up a wall if planted at the bottom, but spreading and cascading means that planted at the top, they're going to spill it over. And depending on the plant, we're going to see them spill or spread anywhere from a foot to even 2 feet down the wall, and in some cases even longer over time. In addition to erosion control and weed competition, a ground cover layer in a perennial or a shrub garden, and even in a rock wall situation, also acts as a living mulch. So we know that our bare earth ends up being compacted by rain. Sun can really like bake and dry out the earth that's bare and exposed. And we also then from rain can see erosion where the soil just washes away. Living mulch or even non-living mulch. So a non-living mulch, compost, bark dust, straw in a garden, for example. Non-living mulch would just be a material that's spread over top of the soil to give it that layer of protection. But a living mulch is essentially, you know, light, airy, or fluffy plant material or a dense matting style of plant that covers the soil to give it that same layer of protection that we would get from a bark to reduce compaction, erosion, and the drying out effect of the sun, keeping even the, you know, soil in that area cooler and more moist because of the plant layer that's growing over top of it. And because these ground covers and these perennials tend to be low growing and mounding plants, they are perfect to be tucked at the base of larger shrubs or in between larger growing perennials or at the front of a bed or a border to make that transition from either hardscape or pathways onto the bigger plant material. The kind of, you know, watchword, I guess, when we're talking about ground cover is, well, yeah, sometimes ground cover can be invasive. I mean, it's ground cover. You know, the like what in the name doesn't tell you that it's going to grow and spread and cover the ground. So you need to do some research, plan for the plant to spread, and be okay with that. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't extract or transplant ground cover from one area that we wouldn't want it in to another, but the faster growing, the more aggressive the ground cover is, the more likely it is that you'll have to, at some point, create some boundaries for it or do some sort of control or maintenance on its growth. Most of our creeping perennials are still coming up from a central stem and will grow out a slightly wider root system, but not exactly like root all the way to the edge of the plant, if you know what I mean. So it's going to come up and kind of have a wide root system, but then an even wider skirt, so to speak, of a plant that sits on the ground around it. Like you would see this is Veronica Georgia Blue. And although when it's not in bloom, we have just this nice tight mound of green with sort of a burgundy dark chocolate hue to it, when it flowers, it has this nice airy additional layer of these beautiful kind of periwinkle blue flowers. But the stems themselves aren't rooting back down on the ground. And so when this plant is out of bloom and these long kind of airy stems are no longer colorful, we could either snip it off or go along in a bigger area with something like a string trimmer or an electric trimmer and prune it back or shear it back again to that kind of nice green foundation that it had. And that'll help freshen it up for the rest of the season. Often that shearing back after bloom for a lot of these plants will help stimulate a reflush of flowers. And if they are not rebloomers, at least again, help to keep the plant looking cleaner as it grows for the rest of the season. A lot of these plants are actually evergreen. So again, you'll find in the handout that there's an asterisk in front of the evergreen plants. They're also mentioned in the handout as either being evergreen or semi-evergreen. And semi-evergreen plants just kind of bow out in the worst weather conditions of winter and then usually grow back quickly instead of waiting for like spring dormancy to be released. They are also, oh gosh, what was I saying? They are evergreen perennials, and in many cases you will see deer and rabbit resistance. So they're labeled out on the handout as whether or not they're deer and rabbit resistance. And there's even one of these ground cover plants for shade that is also slug resistant. And that is pretty exciting, especially if you're a shade gardener. So to get into some of the plant material right away, again, first I want to start with just kind of those basic steppables. Now, there's a lot of choices out there in the world of ground covers, and your like lowest, most mat forming style of plant is low enough that you can walk right on it. So it's an alternative to lawns, or steppables are often either on the sides of pathways or stone walkways, or even in between stepping stones. Maybe also planted in between like stone patios, flagstone patios, that kind of thing. There are lots of choices out there, and I just kind of want to highlight some of our favorites. Time? Did I bring in the time? I did not bring in any time, but looks like I left the time outside. The red creeping thyme, woolly thyme, these are very tiny leafed, mat forming ground cover within maybe 1 to 3 inches off the ground. Very tight, compact growth. The woolly thyme is at least a little bit looser in its growth habit, and also has kind of a fine silvery gray fuzz on the leaf, which gives it a kind of gray fuzzy appearance, as opposed to the red creeping thyme, elfin thyme. They're more of a green leaf. Very, very tiny leaf though. The flower on them also is very tiny, but they bloom in late spring, early summer, and just, again, carpet themselves with very small flowers that are attractive to pollinators. Most time bloom in pink, kind of a red or white, and the foliage itself, if you walk on it, because it is a steppable, you walk on thyme, you get this nice aroma that is released. It's not the same as the thyme that you have in your spice jar in the kitchen, or thyme as some people call it. That is more of an upright growing herb. Creeping thyme or ground cover thyme is, like I said, really mat forming and dense. Great for full sun, or maybe light or filtered sun, but your best flowering and best productivity is going to be in full sun for thyme. Now, full sun is 6 hours or more. So if you've got less than 6 hours, you're in partial sun, which you'll see some plants that say full to partial sun. So that's fine in full sun, but also okay in that 6 hours to 4 hours or so. Anything under 4 hours of sunlight is really a form of shade. So, and again, we're going to get into the shade plants. The table is divided into more shade plants on my on stage left, I guess it would be, and sun plants on stage right. But it's not that the shade plants don't bloom, they just aren't in bloom yet. So these are the guys, the sun happens to be more bloomy right now, but that's just because these are early spring flowering plants. But that also means, so Obretia, Arabis, they bloom in March, April, maybe into May, and then they're done. So occasionally Obretia will reflower in the fall, but just a light blooming, not this like cover itself with flowers type of habit. And again, that light shearing back after they finish blooming will help keep the wall looking nice and fresh. It's still going to regrow through the season, so it will fill itself out and continue to spill over the wall or spread out on the ground. But that kind of cleanup after bloom is just what keeps it in good shape. Obretia is tolerant of light shade. It is deer and rabbit resistant and extremely drought tolerant. So this can even grow into kind of like pockets in a wall if you've got that situation. And basket of gold, the same, extremely drought tolerant, deer and rabbit resistant, early spring blooming, about 6 inches tall and then 18 inches wide or more, where the Obretia can trail down the wall about 2 feet. So give you even just a little bit more trailing. Obretia is often called false rock cress or purple rock cress, but the actual rock cress is a similar looking plant. And again, you see it on the handout. It's called Arabis. This is Arabis, and this happens to be a variegated form. So this is variegated rock cress. And, you know, so rock cress, right? The plant is kind of telling us in its common name. I don't know what cress is. Maybe that's prettiness or top like crest. I'm not sure. I didn't look into rock cress, what that means. But I'm like, rock's in the name. So what do you know? This is another evergreen. Dainty little white flowers right now are actually attractive to early season pollinators. Believe it or not, this plant is in the same family as broccoli and cauliflower and cabbage and kale, but don't eat it. But the flower, you can start to kind of see the similarity if you look closely at the flower. Butterflies, pollinators, it's evergreen, deer resistant again, and about 8 inches tall, spreads to about 1 foot to 18 inches. This is such a pretty one against, again, like dark rocks or boulders really to stand out. It's more of a spreading, kind of clumping, spreading perennial, but at the edge of a wall, it will spill over 1 foot or 18 inches or so.
We have a question that asks how you prep a rock area for planting.
It's a great question. So, I mean, if we're talking about boulders in just a loose wall where boulders have been inserted into the wall, if there's been nothing on it, then you most likely have had some erosion. So soil has washed away in between the rockery. The ideal condition would be to put some more soil back in. And I'm talking topsoil, because topsoil is going to have the best kind of longevity in there and not decompose or wash away like a compost or a planting mix would. And then if you can plant right away into those pockets, the plant that's in there is going to help hold those, hold the soil in. If it's a vertical and the plant won't stay in right away, you can use long landscape staples. So we use them often to hold like weed fabric down. Nice long staples to push in around the root ball themselves to just temporarily support the plant on a vertical until it gets itself rooted, and then one day you can come along and pull those staples out while you're doing some other maintenance on the wall. If you're talking about, again, like a retaining wall where you don't have pockets, you're going to be planting at the top of that wall, and often you're still you have to plant back from the bricks because the bricks may be 8-10 inches wide. So you've got to plant right at the edge of those bricks and then give the perennial time to grow over the bricks and then down over the edge of that wall. But since we're talking about perennials, one of the one of the good things to keep in mind is how perennials grow. Perennials they get bigger and better every year. So when we put them in their first year, they don't do a lot of growth compared to years after that. First year is doing a lot of rooting, doing a lot of foundational work underground. By the third year that a perennial's in the ground, it's usually taking now the space that the tag told us. These are getting 18 inches wide. By year 3, they'll be 18 inches wide. We often say for the way that perennials grow is the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, and by the third year they leap, which tells you that they, again, finally take the size that they told you that they would. So these plants just get bigger and better over time. And eventually, if they're bigger than you want them to be, most perennials can then be divided and transplanted into further areas of the garden or shared with friends, which is one of the greatest things that gardeners do, share plants. Candy tuft I talked about here as a early spring blooming, fantastic ground cover. It's a great filler between shrubbery. Candy tuft is evergreen, so we have this nice fine kind of thin green leaf that's deep dark green and looks great through the winter. Then early spring tops itself with these large clusters of flowers that are attractive to early season pollinators, our native bees, and also butterflies like the flowers on candy tuft. Candy tuft is a long blooming perennial that again can be sheared back lightly after it flowers just to keep it looking nice, and often will bloom again in the fall just with a lighter bloom, not quite as densely coating the plant, but just a nice lighter flush of flowers. Candy tuft can take full sun or partial sun, but into less and less sun, it's going to flower less profusely. Deer and rabbit resistant and drought tolerant. So again, a really great kind of overall plant for between shrubbery, at the border of a perennial garden, or spilling over retaining walls or rock walls. Lithodora is another one of these, gosh, how much do I love this color of blue. It is, I'm saying it's cobalt blue. I think I may call it sapphire in my handout. Oh no, I just call it intensely blue. Well, yeah, because it is intensely blue. It's hard to get this color blue in nature, in flowers, period. So, blue, 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 blue. Lithodora is also evergreen, super tough ground cover, best in full sun. It is really commonly seen in coastal gardens and landscapes because it's able to withstand sandy soils, but it doesn't mind occasional moisture. Deer and rabbit resistant, again, which our coastal gardeners really need to pay attention to a lot more than we do, although we're getting a lot more deer these days. It's primarily a early spring bloomer, but then we'll again do kind of repeat light bloomings throughout the rest of the summer and another sort of light flowering in the fall. 6 inches to maybe a foot tall and about a foot to 18 inches wide. This is Grace Ward, which is kind of the most standard with that beautiful intense blue of Lithodora, but there are lighter flowers. This is called White Star, so more of a pale blue with a little white edging on the petals. Again, small, kind of furry, evergreen leaves, very durable plant. And another one that says rock, well, litho, right? So if you are if you've got your etymology on, litho means stone in Greek. This is actually, most of our perennials are named in Latin. Obscure fact, this is a perennial that's named with a Greek name. So Lithodora means stone gift. So there you have it. It's probably grows in Greece on stones. That's my guess. So again, prune them back if there's any winter damage because it is evergreen. If it looks kind of slimy or you have a little bit of dieback in the winter, you can, right after they finish flowering, just shear them back lightly, and that will help flush out a new layer of growth that's fresh and cleaner looking. Dianthus is another one on the list that we're talking more like April through June. This plant flowers. It's budded now, so it will be blooming here very soon, but a dense matte. And again, this is a great color against darker stones. It is that blue-gray, that steely blue-gray that really performs best in full sun, but Dianthus can grow in partial sun. Extremely easy, low-maintenance plant that the only thing Dianthus does not want is wet, like standing water or wet soil, which again makes it great for banks and borders, retaining walls, and areas where we know that the water's running off. The flowers, these are sometimes just called cheddar pinks. This is Dianthus fire witch because it has this extremely sinister pink, I guess. I don't know why witch, but it's just a sweet plant when it's covered in flowers, and they have this really kind of spicy, like clove fragrance to them. So a wonderful aroma. Hummingbirds love them. Butterflies love them. They can make cut flowers, but they're just short stems, and deer and rabbits leave them alone. Dianthus gets about, well, fire witch gets about 8 inches tall, spreads 12 inches, evergreen, drought tolerant, super easy care plant. Catmint. Catmint is probably not, like, this breaks the rules for a ground cover. This is not a ground cover. This is a great filler plant, though, and awesome on rock walls. It's one of my favorite perennials because it blooms from, like, May through September, which is a long time for a perennial. It's not in bloom yet because it's not even April, but it's close. It's actually starting to form little flower clusters at the tips of its leaves, of its stems, so I can see that it's working hard on making flowers soon. They are a kind of pale blue with a tinge of purple, not catnip, but catmint. And I tested it on Spruce, our store cat, this morning, and he could care less about the plant. So don't worry that you're going to be like luring in and, getting all the cats in the neighborhood high with your catnip on your wall, or ending up with a wall of retaining wall of cats. This is more popular with bees, which bees absolutely love this flower. But again, when bees are on a flower that they love and you walk by, it's not like they all of a sudden come chase you. They're still on the flower because that's what they're all about. So you don't have to worry necessarily about a plant that attracts bees being something that's going to put you in jeopardy if you're gardening nearby. So I do find that my catmint at home is almost always covered in bees. I have a hard time pruning it or working near it if I want to do gardening nearby. I have to do it in the early morning before bees wake up. And so bees tend to wake up about 10 or once it gets warm enough in the morning for them to get warm by the sun and move around. So you have to get up early to work on the catmint to avoid the bees. But other than that, deer and rabbit resistant, drought tolerant, 2x2 is a pretty fair gauge on its mature size, and just cut it back at the end of the season and it does go dormant for the winter. So again, just starts growing back about this time of year, looking like so. Snow in summer. I don't have snow in summer today. Cerastium tomentosum is It's another classic that we see on rock walls and ground covers, but it is a short-lived perennial, meaning like, I don't know, 6 years is probably a good run for snow and summer to survive. It's got a real fuzzy, almost white gray, silver gray leaf, very small, very low to the ground. And then in June, it just covers itself with white flowers that looks like a blanket of snow, hence the name Snow and Summer. Really does best in sun. It's a great plant for rocky areas, but again, it's not super commonly stocked. Often you'll see it right around the time when it's about to bloom. Garden centers will carry it then, but it's not right in our like our main group of plants that we carry. Another one that I have seen at our Vancouver store, but not here in Lake Oswego today, is saponaria or soapwort. Saponaria is just about to bloom, so it's going to flower more like April, May. It is also kind of considered weedy by some. It's native in Europe, in parts of Europe, and it's called bouncing bet or lady by the garden gate. So kind of one of those old-fashioned ground cover perennials that's just kind of always there in some gardens. It is light pink, like I said, blooms from spring to early summer, like 4 inches tall, 18 inches wide, takes a wide range of soil conditions. The flowers are attractive to bees and butterflies, again, deer and rabbit resistant, and takes light foot traffic. So great for rock walls, but fine on like pathway edges as well. Now, I said I was going to talk about the steppables, and then I just went straight to pretty things that are blooming. So let me pause before I go to sedums and sempervirums, and we'll talk just a little bit about some of the ground cover that are truly steppable ground cover in the front layer here. So stars for sun, the best steppable sun ground covers, as I mentioned earlier, the creeping times. They are low, they are durable, they release a little bit of fragrance when you step on them. They take full sun and drought conditions once they're established. Deer, rabbits leave them alone, and the flowers are attractive to native pollinators. So you've got a lot going for you right there, choosing amongst the creeping times, which range in flower form, flower color, to pink, to red, to white, and then the woolly time, which has a fuzzier growth pattern, a fuzzier looking leaf, and a soft pink flower, and is evergreen. This is Blue Star Creeper. Blue Star Creeper is another one of the extremely common, highly aggressive, yet successful in most places, ground covers. It's not in bloom yet, but it will be very soon. It's a mid to late spring bloomer with a tiny star that is kind of a lavender blue, pale in color, very floriferous in full sun, but tolerates full to partial sun. This is again deer and rabbit resistant, tolerates moderate foot traffic, so a nice dense mat that it forms. You can't even see soil here. It roots down as it grows, so as this little bit that comes over the edge, if it had contact with soil, it would form roots along its stem to hold that soil. So that's how a mat-forming perennial typically grows, is as it extends its greenery, then it can root back down from its further extension, which helps to control erosion and hold the soil, but can also make it more aggressive in its spreading. Blue Star Creeper does like a little bit of shade in the hottest of the afternoon sun and some regular watering, so it's not one that I would consider drought tolerant, but maybe 6 inches tall at the most and easily spread about a foot, but you could put him closer if you wanted faster fill in. For sun to partial sun, the mosses, this is Irish moss and Scotch moss. These are another one of those. They're not true mosses, but very low, dense, ground-hugging, ground cover type plants. These are both evergreen. The blue star creeper is semi-evergreen at best, so bad winters and it'll die back. Scotch and Irish moss do make a tiny flower, not super exciting. Very small white flower that comes on in midsummer and is kind of gone quickly. But the plants over time can create a little bit more of a mound instead of the flat that you think of as a layer of moss. So it's not, it'll get a little bit of a terrain to it over time. The Scotch moss, the more golden, is more tolerant of shade than Irish moss is. But a lot of us think of moss as like shade, and it's not going to be happy there. So because it's not a true moss, does want a little bit of sun, but it's fine with regular or average moisture in most gardens, and takes moderate foot traffic as well. So a fun one, light foot traffic, not moderate, light foot traffic as well. The mosses. Also down here for part sun to shade, the last Steppable that I have, I wish came with smell-o-vision, which I heard some weird radio story that they're working on it again. So maybe we'll have smell-o-vision in a few years. It would at least be good in most of my classes, except for we would turn it off in the compost and fertilizer classes. This is Corsican mint, and that's what I'm talking about. If you could smell it, it's super, super minty. And just by kind of touching the leaves, certainly by walking on it, you would just be like in minty mist and smell it everywhere, maybe even linger on your shoes. Corsican mint makes a tiny pink flower in the summertime. It prefers moist soil. It likes a kind of semi-shady or shady condition, very dense mat forming, and can spread somewhat, but mostly in areas where it stays wetter or moist. So you can kind of control the moisture, control the spread by keeping an area drier where you don't want it to go. Corsican mint, usually not an evergreen, so it dies back in the wintertime, does grow back early in the spring, so not in an area where you would need to have coverage year round. But again, does spread and root back down, holds soil very well. Deer, rabbit resistant, because deer and rabbits don't like smelly things. But you do occasionally have some slugs that leave little trails and will kill out some sections of the Corsican mint. And another for shade to part shade, one of my favorites, this is brass buttons. This is Leptonella. It's New Zealand brass buttons, so it must be from New Zealand. I didn't ask. It's short, 1 to 2 inches high, easily spreads 18 inches. If you look closely at it right now, it is starting to make its brass buttons, and its foliage looks like teeny, tiny burgundy and green ferns. So I'm going to let you kind of hopefully zoom in on that and see little buttons are the flowers. And that's about it. They're not going to do much more than that. But this lovely fern texture is soft and cushy. And I would just walk on this on my bare feet. I might even like lay down on a hot day on this. It's nice, cool texture. Prefers, as I mentioned, partial shade or shade and occasional moisture. It's definitely not going to be a drought tolerant ground cover, but easily, it's fairly fast growing, easily divided. And if you took something like this and you wanted to plant it between stepping stones, you could cut this into half, if not even possibly quarters, and then stuff those into smaller spaces like between stepping stones, or that again, asking about how you would plant and prepare a rock wall. Some of these, you would go for the smallest plants you could, and in some cases even try to divide those plants further, as long as they all had roots, and put them into those wall pockets instead of trying to, you know, imagine that you were going to plant a whole gallon-sized plant into a wall crevice. Probably don't have crevices that large. So brass buttons, again, these we find, all of these we find in our ground cover section. here at the garden centers. Now to sedums and succulents, which are kind of their own category, but there are ground cover, like low mat forming succulents, as well as the hens and chicks that we know of as sempervivums. Sedums are also called stone crop. That's another one of their common names. So again, rocks, stone, this is the crop of stones. Is the, kind of again, where we find them in nature is usually growing in rockeries and other kind of hostile conditions. The range of succulents and sedums includes a adorable native. So this is Sedum Cape Blanco, which is one of our Oregon natives. Beautiful gray, again, that gray, powder blue gray foliage. It's even grayer than the dianthus leaf. So just a beautiful contrast against dark colored rockery or dark stone. But this you wouldn't see like against cement, right? Because it's almost the same color. So yellow flowers in the summertime on the Cape Blanco, and this is an evergreen succulent as well. Succulents are not tolerant of foot traffic because they're super brittle. So every time you would walk on this or step on this, you'd break off little pieces, which is not the worst thing in the world, because we also know succulents will just reroot if you kind of drop them on the ground somewhere to spread more. But you would smash and trash the plant as you walked on it. Best in full sun for Cape Blanco. Other fun mat forming succulents that take some not foot traffic, but give us some nice flowers. We have here Sedum Red Ice, and you can see in the picture the red color of what we see in the winter time. But right now, after it's put out some green leaves in spring, is its nice green foliage. It's evergreen, but again, winter red. The flowers on this are kind of a nice pink color in summer. This grows in sun or part shade, but you're going to get best flowers and the most dense growth in sun. Very drought tolerant, and then the flowers are attractive to bees, butterflies, but not deer and rabbits. So we got all of that out of the way for the sedums. This is Delosperma, which is also known as ice plant. It's not a technical sedum, but it is still a succulent type plant with a real juicy leaf. Again, mat forming, trailing over the edges of rockery and rock walls, or just spreading on the ground in hot, sunny, dry areas or on banks. Helps to stabilize banks, so erosion control. This is opal, which has this like intensely magenta flower. It only opens in the sunshine, so the sun was not shining this morning when I brought it inside, and it's not shining inside either. So the flowers are not open, but they'll be open later today. When the flowers are open, they usually have at least one bee on them, so they're very popular with bees and pollinators. It's also evergreen, best in full sun. Delosperma, lots of different colors of ice plant. Usually really bright colors, so magentas and oranges and yellows and reds. A fun one for hot rockeries. A little bit larger in just their kind of form and habit, but still succulent nonetheless. These would be gorgeous spilling over the edge of rock walls or softening boulders or rocks in the landscape. Here we have Sedum lineare, which you can already see spilling over the edge of the container. We have Sedum, which is this one, Angelina. Sedum Angelina will soon be spilling over. All of these in my arms are evergreen, even though none of them are actually green at all. So they're ever present in the wintertime. They don't die back. They are brittle succulents that end up being drought tolerant and best in full sun. We see a little bit of winter color also on Angelina, which turns kind of copper orange in the wintertime. And then this is Sedum rupestre blue spruce, Sedum reflexum blue spruce, another that looks like a conifer almost, with those needle-like looking leaves, but will slowly lay down and become a nice dense mat with those upright spikes as the new growth. Blue ice has a pink flower, I think. Vibrant flowers, that's what the tag says. I think they're pink. I don't remember. It could be yellow. That's often either sedums are pink or yellow. So again, fun, drought tolerant, easy care, low maintenance, not foot traffic, but blooms usually attract pollinators, deer and rabbit resistant, full sun drought tolerant. Sempervivums, also known as hens and chicks, like rule the rock wall scenarios. You can see this one is exploding out of its pot. So we have our standard kind of rosettes of hens and chicks in the center of the container, but then they have sent out, like one of these hens had a bunch of chicks, and now the chicks are growing up and looking for space of their own. So they've kind of gradually spilled over the edge of the container, and that's how these plants grow. Hen makes chicks in these little radials that have kind of umbilical cords of their own, but then each chick will form roots towards the end of its stem, and those roots will grab back down on soil nearby to hold and continue its growth. The little umbilical cord can stay connected or can rot over time, or you could disconnect chicks from the hens and just lay them down in other areas of your project planting, or tuck them into holes in rock walls and staple them if you needed to. And these will grab hold and grow on to become full like this one over time. Short, but spreading up to 6 inches to a foot, best in full sun, extremely drought tolerant, and again, deer and rabbit resistant, but don't step on them. So not a foot traffic, not on the path, but they could be on the edge of the path, and definitely great on retaining walls and around boulders. Ornamental oregano is one that is going to be blooming here in another couple of months and then flowers through this summer. Right now, it looks and smells a lot like culinary oregano, and it's truly oregano, so it's not as flavorful, but there's no reason why you couldn't run out and pinch some of this off for your spaghetti sauce or whatever as well. The flowers on ornamental oregano, this happens to be Hopley's Purple. In the handout I mentioned Kent's Beauty. They sort of look like hops flowers in green and pink, almost also like little pine cones maybe. I don't know, you have to see them. I can't really describe them. But wonderful, long-lasting. Bees and butterflies love the flowers. They dry well, so they make nice cut flowers. It is best in full or partial sun. And again, rabbit and deer resistant. Cut it back a little after it blooms to kind of keep it clean and tidy looking. But the flower period on something like Kent's Beauty often goes from June until August or even September, and then dies back in the wintertime. So it is a herbaceous perennial, not evergreen. Trailing rosemary, I mean, we all know about upright rosemary, but trailing rosemary is another one that is an evergreen, perfect on rock walls and retaining walls. This is Irene, so trailing Irene has a little bit of an upright growth and this nice spilling habit to it. It does make a kind of pale blue, purple flower in early spring that's just finished blooming. I can again smell how wonderfully fragrant it is, which means that we can grab some and use it in culinary applications, but that fragrance tends to deter deer and rabbits, so we don't have those kinds of problems. Trailing rosemary is a little less hardy in winter temperatures to the upright forms of rosemary, but usually on walls, retaining walls or slopes the cold air is moving, air is moving on a slope. So cool air does pool at the bottom of a slope, but on the slope itself is generally more of a microclimate. So you shouldn't have to worry too much about temperature or vulnerability to winter conditions on a wall for the trailing rosemary. I'm mentioning a few natives because, of course, wherever we can, it's great to plant natives in your landscape. For a native ground cover, this is Kinnick, one of the best ever botanical names. This is Arctostaphylos uva ursi. Love that name. I don't know, I just think it's super cool. Showing us its sweet bell-shaped flowers that are kind of a light pink. This is one of those perfect flowers for our native pollinators. A bumblebee can't get in there, honeybees can't get in there, but our native bees can fit right in there and get the pollen and nectar from these flowers. Evergreen, super durable plant. It's tolerant of full sun, hot, drought conditions once it's established, but will also go into light shade. It is deer and rabbit resistant again, and after the little flowers that bloom in the spring, it often makes a red berry, which gives it one of its other common names, which is bearberry, but I don't think it's going to attract bears, so you don't have to worry about that. Again, native to Oregon, native to the Pacific Northwest, Kinnick, fun to say, even better to plant in your garden, and everyone wins. Now into the partial sun to shade creepers and perennials. Lamium, sometimes referred to as dead nettle. Now, it's called dead nettle because it doesn't sting you, but it kind of has the appearance of stinging nettle. So dead nettle, it's a weird name, but that explains it. This is Ghost, Lamium Ghost, and this is Lamium Pink Pewter. Both of them have this kind of silver overlay on the foliage with green edges. They are evergreen, so perennials, partial sun to shade. We are, here we have the flower. So the flower can be kind of a purple, pink, or white, and sometimes yellow. Although this plant can be drought tolerant, it is also tolerant of moist soil. Gets up to about a foot tall and could be 2 feet wide or spill 2 feet down on a wall. Also attractive in container plantings as well, but just makes a really nice front of the border, again, ground cover or spilling over walls in that darker shade area where you really need something to lighten up the area, the plantings. This gives a great contrast against deep dark greens. Who's next? Lismachia, the jennies. So the jennies we talked about last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago in our container planting class. The jennies are Lismachia. This is kind of the whole, let me see, here's the whole series here. We have green creeping jenny, golden creeping jenny, and chocolate creeping jenny. All three have a golden yellow flower in late spring, early summer, but they're really grown more for their foliage. They have kind of a coin-shaped or rounded leaf, very low to the ground. If this were planted, let me get some of the jennies out of my arms. If this were planted in the ground, it would grow flat against the ground itself and also make roots along the stem at the points where the leaves are attached. So it is another one that can spread out, root down, spread out further and root down from the edges of the leaves or edges of the stems. And that makes it easy to spread and divide. It can be considered invasive, and for some people, I would say it probably is because it really runs amok in wet soil or moist soil conditions. You can control its spread, similar to the Corsican mint, by kind of withholding water or having a drier area where it doesn't like to spread or grow into as much. Creeping Jenny is semi-evergreen, so depending on the winter, sometimes it's there all winter, sometimes it dies back in like late January, February, and then grows back real quick. We love to use Creeping Jenny as a spilling foliage component in shady containers. It's perennial, it's durable, and again, it is deer and rabbit resistant. One plant, as my handout says, one plant can fill an area of up to 2 to 3 square feet. So just beware of that. I had it in a container in my garden, and it trailed all the way out of the pot, hit the ground, rooted, the piece that came out of the pot rooted on the ground when it touched the ground, and then kind of continued to grow on from there. And now I have it in one of my garden beds that I wasn't expecting it to be in, because it escaped from a pot like that. So beware if the situation applies. Veronica Georgia Blue, already talked about her a little bit, but another lovely woodland ground cover. She can grow in the sun. Georgia can grow in the sun. Georgia can grow in the shade. It is going to flower best with at least partial sun, and just be a nice green and slightly burgundy colored foliage plant in shade. Deer, rabbit resistant. Cut it back a little after blooms just to keep it a little bit tighter and nicer looking. Vinca, I wasn't even going to talk about Vinca, but it's got its applications. I know it also has its haters. So if you're a Vinca hater, just plug your ears for a minute. It definitely is considered invasive by some. Vinca is not native, and it's a relatively aggressive ground cover. Periwinkle, creeping myrtle, these are some of the other common names of Vinca. Right now it's in bloom, and this is Vinca minor. Small leaves, smaller flowers, the very peri color of the year, right? This is definitely that color. It is deer and rabbit resistant, grows in sun or shade, is tolerant of a wide range of soil conditions, and roots along the stem similar to the Jennies, and comes in not just that periwinkle blue. So this is Vinca alba. So this is white Vinca. Also there's a burgundy, kind of a wine burgundy colored flower as well. But I brought this one in to show that one of the long stems that's grown off of this plant has a root that's developed, a couple of roots that are developing to show us how it would spread in the ground. So again, if you were to plant a spreading ground cover like this, any of these that do root down, and you wanted to encourage them to root more quickly to hold a bank or erosion, you would spread this out, plant it in the ground, then spread out the stems, laying them straight down, laying them right onto the soil, across the surface of the soil, and then using either the landscape staples that I was talking about, or you could bend a bunch of paper clips into, little U's, and then just gently paper clip or secure the stem to the ground near one of the leaf junctions. So because the root comes from where the leaves are, just underneath it, we want to kind of create constant contact between the stem and the soil, and that's what that little staple will do, and that'll keep it from just like blowing around in the wind, which reduces the chance of that root to grow. So that constant contact with the soil, with the little staple, will stimulate those roots to grow more quickly. And then of course, the quicker this extension can root, the faster it can grow from the ends of it, because it's got some support in between. So showing you again kind of what some of these ground covers do and how they do it, as opposed to, I was mentioning earlier, somebody like Obretia, which looks like it's filling the pot here with the whole plant, but you can lift it up and see that it's really rooted into a central spot, as opposed to the Scotch moss. We can't I mean, we can lift a little here, but we can't lift any of the edges of Scotch moss because it's rooted all the way to the end, to the edge, which means we could divide this because we'll get roots from each piece, but we can't necessarily divide this without jeopardizing a piece that will come off with no root at all, and that's not likely to be a viable plant for transplantation. Okay, a few more. I've got Campanula. Love this plant. Campanula is a large genus of perennials, but this is the Birch's hybrid variety. So Campanula Birch's hybrid, and it's golden friend Dixon's Gold. So Birch's hybrid makes a beautiful bell-shaped flower in that, I'll show you in the, it's a more purple than blue, but I call it blurple. This is another low, matte growing, evergreen perennial, hardy to like -40 degrees, gets maybe 6 inches tall, 10 to 12 inches wide, long blooming, often flowers from May through August, if not even longer. You can cut it back a little in between bloom cycles, and that'll help to keep it neat and tidy and likely to rebloom. Light foot traffic on Birch's hybrid, and Dixon's Gold is more tolerant of partial shade. So Birch's hybrid is going to flower best in sun, but will take partial sun. Dixon's Gold goes from sun to partial sun as well. That same little purple bell-shaped flower, but a nice chartreuse mat of foliage. Campanula also, deer and rabbit resistant. The flowers are attractive to bees and butterflies. And another that's attractive to bees and butterflies and native, we've got oxalis here, our Oregon wood sorrel, redwood sorrel. This is Klamath ruby. So this is a variety that has these it's funny. Oxalis are funny. They will fold up. Their leaves fold down, I guess. They fold down in shade. So because I've had this plant in the classroom now for about an hour, the leaves are already beginning to fold downward and collapse like it's nighttime. But when they are fully open, you can really see the maroon kind of burgundy color of the reverse on the leaves. And of course, having just passed St. Patrick's Day, the shamrock aspect of it is also hard not to miss. But the plant also blooms. Here's a teeny tiny flower. It's pale, pale pink, almost white. And this is a popular flower for our native pollinators and native butterflies. As I mentioned, it is a native. It is kind of creeping to about 8 inches tall, spreads easily a foot, and has a like super, super, super sour taste to it. So as a kid, when we were out in the woods playing for hours and hours and told to come back when the street lights come on, we got thirsty. We were in the 70s. We weren't carrying around water bottles. So we would find redwood sorrel and chew on the stems, and it would be like a rehydration break for kids in the woods. So you can also take a little snack or sample of your redwood sorrel, and it's just got a interesting flavor. Last one, but the best one, for shade or part shade. Love, love, love this plant. This is called Saxifrage London Pride. London Pride saxifrage looks a lot like hens and chicks. It has rosettes that it forms really low to the ground, kind of tight clumps of rosettes, but it mats to just literally densely cover the ground and compete with weeds. This is the plant that is slug resistant. In fact, there's a slug crawling on the stem, on the tag right now, and it's just like, what am I going to eat, you guys? Get me on another plant. Find a hosta. It's a tiny, tiny slug, but it can't do anything to this, and it looks perfect. So the foliage has no blemishes whatsoever. It is so slug and deer and rabbit resistant. It's evergreen, mildly drought tolerant once it's established, but prefers just regular moisture in the soil. Spreads pretty quickly, but stays nice and low. This variety, London Pride, has this kind of random yellow, kind of splotchy variegation on the leaves, which just helps, again, lighten up shady areas. There are other forms of saxifrage that are all green with a slightly smaller rosette or smaller leaf. I think that's miniature London Pride. London Pride is named because I read this once. It was found growing in the streets of London after the Blitzkrieg of World War II or whatever. So London Pride, they were like, yeah, this plant came back after the war. The flowers that it's going to form coming soon are on these long, thin, airy stems. And then they make this really delicate, kind of airy, frothy looking flower that is delicate, light pink or white. They last a long time. And then when they are kind of gone past their beauty, it's the easiest thing to just snap them with your fingers. You don't have to get out with any kind of tools or anything. And then that just cleans them back up to this nice little rosette. They tend to bloom in spring, sometimes occasionally in the fall. As I mentioned, evergreen. This one's kind of showing, both of these are showing how they spread. So we've got the main rosette that's flowering, and then it's got, it's got little offshoots, kind of satellites that it's putting further away from the rosette on a little stem extension, and then this will grow to be the same size and style of the main rosette, forming a big clump over time. Once that gets to this size, then it does the same, sends out little extensions, and eventually forms a dense colony that competes with weeds. That was a lot to cover. But I hope, again, that gives you a sense of some of the characteristics of these cascading, mounding, and ground cover type plants, which ones you would want to walk on, which ones to show off on the, ugly or less attractive retaining wall or wall that you have in your landscape. Deer and rabbit resistance tends to be part of their, most of these plants' kind of attractiveness, so that's a huge benefit. And as well, you'll see which ones are evergreen on the handout as it is attached. And Becky will use it up with some pictures later this afternoon, or who knows when she can. Again, thanks everyone for watching, and happy gardening.